So they are participating on the phone, and hopefully for those who are ill, you feel better, and we can catch up with you very soon. And then thank you also to all the members of the public who are here with us. And there is a sign-in sheet going around, so if you haven't already signed in, please sign in. And similarly for the commissioners, if you could sign in the attendance sheet, that would be great. I'll always like to begin by thanking the space that's hosting us. Today we're here at the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings in their training room. And we are probably going to be moving around to different spaces, different meetings, so you'll get to see more of the city and city agencies as we travel around. We're videotaping today, we're live streaming, we're trying a couple of things. We're also doing WebEx, we haven't done this before. And I wanted to ask for the commissioners who are on WebEx or on the phone with us, could you say who you are? I just want to make sure we can hear you and you can hear us. Remember to unmute.
Really, Perez, it's really hard to hear you. Can you get closer to the mic, please?
Hard to hear. Okay, is this better? Better? Lillian?
A little bit.
A little bit.
Yep.
Okay, who else is on the line?
Holly's here.
Holly, okay. Can you hear
Also
okay?
very hard.
Hard to hear. All right. Anyone else? I think Linda's also on the line. So are you still having trouble hearing me? Yes, no, maybe? Okay, yes, a safe conclusion perhaps. So we are going to figure this out. Keep moving. We have remote captioning today. We will have a transcript, which we can post up online. And also we do have Spanish language translation today. If anyone needs an interpreter, please let us know. As we did during the last meeting, we will have public comment in the last section of the meeting. And we're just gonna start off going through some of the internal business of the commission. We do not have a quorum today, so we cannot approve the minutes. So we will need to table that for the next time. And I just want to remind everybody that that is how we transact our business. If we do not have a majority of commissioners who are in office present physically at the meeting, we cannot take action on anything. So please remember that as we go forward, as we're trying to identify meeting dates and you're fixing your calendar as well. So, so we're just gonna move past the minutes for this meeting for now. The next section of the meeting, we're gonna be talking about some updates for people. First is just hiring. I wanted to let people know that I did in the last meeting introduce some folks who we have on as part of the team. We do have a new team member who started with us a week ago. His name is Andy Toledo, and he's our community engagement specialist. He's coming to us from the Bronx Borough President's Office and has many, many years of experience with community boards and community outreach. I don't know if he's here in the room. He was downstairs helping people come through. We also have 2 additional people who completed their onboarding and should be able to start with us in the next 2 weeks. And then that is 3 lines that we have filled. The remaining 3 are also moving forward. So hope that by this time or by the next meeting, we will have every line filled. The next big chunk of time that we have in this meeting is really to talk through the bylaws a little bit. The law department produced the first draft of the bylaws, and then Donna and Mark took some time to review and comment on the draft. Then we took their comments back to the law department, who then gave us more feedback. So the version that you have in your packets is reflective of 2 rounds of edits that we've gone through. And a note is that we are not voting on the bylaws today, not just because we don't have a quorum, which is a fact, but also because we want to give you time to read through these and make comments and ask questions. So what I'm hoping that we can do is today I'll go through the main topics covered. Donna and Mark can chime in as you add to whatever we're discussing, and then in between this meeting and the next one, if you could send me your suggestions, questions, edits, which I can then discuss with both of them and go to law. And then I would like the next meeting to have a version that is inclusive of everyone's comments. So I think we might have a little bit of time to get into questions and comments today, but if not, certainly we can do it in between. And I wanted to start this segment by prefacing that we are not required to have bylaws, right? So it's meant to help us structure and streamline our work. There are commissions that don't have bylaws. We are just trying to create more structure, process, and have the bylaws be easy to understand, give us basic guidelines. And the law department's draft really is based heavily on the charter and what the charter tells us we are supposed to be doing. So just to go through the sections of the bylaws, and again, please, the both of you please do chime in. So the first section is just the name of the CEC, the Civic Engagement Commission. The next section focuses on purpose and powers, and it's broadly defined to just say generally we're trying to improve civic engagement through different types of partnerships. And again, it refers to the chapter of the charter that we are, and section 225A, which is specifically focused on participatory budgeting. And then it also says that these bylaws, when they're adopted, will override a section of the resolution that we passed in May. And that section is really about how the commission will schedule meetings and determine locations for meetings, etc. So a lot of what is specified, or what is specified here, is meant to override that. Are there any questions so far? Okay. The next section is about membership. Again, the law department refers to section 3201 of the charter. I know we had a little bit of a conversation about whether to paste the full text of that section here. Again, they thought in the interest of keeping it short, we could link to that section online. And if you recall, that section just talks about who appoints the commissioners, how long their terms are, and their qualifications, etc. Article 4 is about the officers. This is introducing something new that we do not currently have, which is the appointment of a vice chair in the event that the chair cannot be present at a meeting or is otherwise unable to attend to the business of the meeting. Then we should have a vice chair. So this sets out a process to nominate a vice chair, and that person, again, needs to be affirmed by at least 8 members. Other officers can also be appointed, and then it specifies the process of resigning and removal. Any questions or comments?
And ask what other officers you're given.
I think this is in consultation with you all, so I don't have anything in my head right now. I mean, there is the other role for secretary, which is you know, someone who keeps minutes, and that's covered later in the bylaws, can actually be, according to these bylaws, be taken on by staff. So, but we can discuss, I mean, if you all think there's a need for other officers as we're going, this will allow us to, gives us the provision to do that. Yes.
Two things on this. One, this is Mark Diller for those on remote. One is that at the bottom of section 6, there's a statement, removal should require a 2/3 majority. That was actually my explanatory comment. It wasn't meant to be incorporated in the text. 10 members is a 2/3 majority, so
Okay.
the document reflects that. The other is that, not to get hyper technical, but in the creation of other officers, we should also make provision for the elimination of those officers if the commission deems it prudent. That if we wanted to eliminate a position, that if someone resigns from a position or is removed from a position and it's deemed no longer necessary, no sense in filling the position for no reason.
Okay, that would be under 5?
Other officers for.
Number 4.
Oh, and number 4, okay. All right, you can send language for that.
Yep.
Okay, in the next section, Article 5, we have, provision for reimbursement for expenses. And there might be situations in which you are, in the performance of your duties, you might have an expense that you would like to have covered. That's something we can do, discussing with me, and this allows us to do that. So, I think that's helpful. The next section is about staff. And some of this is stuff you've already seen from the charter, and also from the resolution. As I mentioned, this adds the provision of having a secretary who can be someone on staff, so that's something I'm likely to do, so that we have someone regularly taking minutes. So far, we've had CEC staff taking notes, but it will probably be one person once that person is on board. All right. And then the next article is about hearings and meetings. In this section, we're asked to hold at least one public hearing in addition to what is already required for us. And if you recall, we're required to hold a public hearing on the pole site assistance program, so that'll be scheduled after January 1. And this is saying we should do at least one other one. So that's something, I don't know, we might want to talk about that. And then, of course, the other pieces of it allows us to meet at a frequency we can decide is appropriate for our business. Special meetings can be called for by the commissioners. The next sections are about notice of meetings, and place of meetings, saying that we were gonna meet in New York City, we will not meet in Hawaii. And we will make we are required to have our meetings being accessible. And a quorum is defined in this section as the majority of people who are in office. So currently we are 15 in office, and that's why quorum is 8. But if at some point the number of people in office changes, the quorum will also change accordingly.
Can I jump in at that point?
Yeah, of course.
I did read that, and the only thing is that, you're saying that, but then just what we read about, appointing other officers, it takes 8 members for appointment. If we don't have 15,
Mhm.
then 8 is not the majority in terms of.
It's a supermajority, for sure.
Right.
We actually talked about that in connection with section 10 on page 4, which sets out the general rule that in order to take commission action by resolution, this provision would say that you would need 8 members, as my law professor used to say, disregardless of the number of us that are actually appointed. So we would, if there were a full complement of 15, that would be a simple majority. If there were 8 of us appointed and the rest were vacancies, then that would be unanimity, and obviously in between is whatever it is. The law department came back to us and said, in effect, that it is typical for boards of our type to require that majority, to require a majority of the total number of seats, not the total number of persons serving. And so since that seems to be a broader requirement, and when you think about it, not a bad one in terms of good government.
Sure.
That it just makes our work a little harder if it's a contentious issue and there's only 9 of us in office for whatever combination of reasons.
Right.
I do know firsthand that the Department of Education's panel for educational policy, for example, requires a majority of the membership, not the members. So in fact, the same sort of calculation. So that was not accidental.
Okay.
It's a good catch. I caught it too and kind of objected, but that was the response, and I'm satisfied with their response.
Well, it makes sense because if you go down to 14, then,
It's still 8.
right, because if you, anyway.
It's the odd number, even number
Yes,
thing. Yeah.
right. And then the other thing on this is public hearings. Is this saying that there's only 3 days' notice that needs to be given for a public hearing?
Are you in the notice of meeting section?
Yeah, the number 1, you have public hearings and then regular meetings, special meetings, notice of meetings.
I think it's,
There's 3
oh, that's a good
days.
question.
I think that if
That's a
we're
good
gonna
question.
set out for notice of public meetings, I think we need to discuss what that time frame would be. And it needs to be significantly more, I would put forward, than 3 days.
That's a very good slide. I can look into that. Unless do you know the answer to that? Does anyone here know the answer to whether public hearings, whether public hearings, have another time frame other than 3 days? Different from commission meetings, which are public meetings, but not public hearings.
Right.
So we can look into that, since
This says notice of meetings, it doesn't say notice of public hearings.
hearings, yeah.
There actually is no requirement,
So it doesn't say.
notice requirement for a public hearing.
Well, I kind of would like to put something in there so that we ensure that we're not holding a public hearing that has such a short time frame that it's not, in essence.
That's scientifically designed to make sure that no one actually comes to it.
Exactly, Mark, thank you.
Yeah, the balancing act, I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah, the balancing act is if you make the notice requirement too long, then then you'll never actually be able to respond in a nimble way to exigencies and hold a meeting that addresses a particular problem. I don't know that that's gonna be an issue for this commission, but that's, the thinking is shortening it, and not having it too long. On the other hand, I'm gonna bet a good beer that most of us can't turn our schedules around on 3 days' notice and all appear in one place at one time to do that, so.
And with a
realistic-
public hearing, it's hard to push out the information about the meeting in such a short period.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
So something to consider is 15 days or.
Yeah, we can, I will ask if there is any provision somewhere about that, or any rule about that, and if not, we can put it down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Suggestion. So, borough presidents and city planning commission are required to put notification of public hearings into the city record. And I can't recall off the top of my head what the time frame for that is, but it is a requirement. But I think that's just compliance, and I think this body could go above and beyond
Yes.
by using website and other social media tools to give further advanced notification in addition to whatever is the base requirement.
Yeah. Okay. So we would want to include in this section a base requirement, right? And we would aspire to do greater than that,
Yeah.
but
No less than.
to have a minimum requirement. Okay.
2 things actually, if I may. One
Yeah.
is a base requirement for meetings of this commission, and another is a base requirement for public hearings, which may or may not be the same interval.
Yeah,
You might want to consider, for example, a longer lead time for public hearings
Right,
than
that's
for
what we're
meetings of
saying.
the commission.
yeah, so that we were talking about the 15 days.
Right, but 3 days already there, base requirement for the meeting of
The commission.
Well, that's what it says,
Yeah.
but maybe
You
I'm
wanted to
mishearing
make it
Amy, but
more-
I think Amy is saying that even just for meetings of this commission, that 3 days' notice without any other warning is unlikely to produce a quorum and is not appropriate to trying to get our work done.
Yeah.
Is that
Well,
what
no, I mean,
that's
I
not
was
what it is.
specifically
She
looking
was
at
speaking of
public
public
hearings.
hearings, yeah.
But, you know, this one is each meeting, including special meetings, and when you have special
Special meeting, you have
meetings,
a little bit
you
more
need
time.
quite a bit of quick turnaround.
Yep.
If it's
Because the
emergency,
idea is that there's something
That
urgent
rapid
we
that
response
needs.
issue. Yeah.
Okay, so should we just address the public hearings then?
I think
I
so.
think so.
Okay.
Right, great. The next section is about minutes. We did have, and the appointment of the secretary to document the minutes. We did have some conversation, Donna, Mark, and I, about the content of the minutes, and while we didn't put it into the bylaws per law department's advice, do you wanna just say a little bit about what you were suggesting, or?
It is often useful to have in minutes at least a record of the topics discussed, for the reason that if someone were to come along later and say, you should have considered X, you made whatever decision you made and you didn't think about X. And so if the minutes reflect, we thought about X and we decided that X is not that important and we voted against X, but we thought about it, then that becomes a sufficient response to, and an easy way to defeat a challenge to a commission action. And it also serves to inform the public a little more, I'm about to say fulsomely, but that has a different connotation, doesn't
Oh,
it?
yeah.
Completely, a little more completely, as to what we're doing. Today's proposed minutes, for example, simply record that we took one vote last meeting, and that was to approve minutes. And that is the minimum, of course. So it is up to us, I think, to decide whether we want to do more than that. It may be that that's the kind of thing that ought to reside in the discretion of the chair and the secretary. Although a consistent practice would be recommended.
Can someone elaborate on open meeting rules and laws? I mean, we're video recorded, we're tape recorded, there's transcripts. So in essence, everything that we hear and discuss is in some form of documentation, it's
Mhm.
documented in some way.
That's right.
Yeah,
So
or it's required to be when we have a quorum,
when we have a quorum,
yeah.
so
So if-
today doesn't have to be,
Technically, no, but since it's a meeting of the commission, and we were expecting to have one, we're just proceeding as is. But there have been times when I have, for instance, like we've done a phone call or something, right?
Right.
That's not considered a formal meeting subject to open meeting law, because it's a smaller group of people,
right.
yeah.
And we're also not submitting minutes from those discussions of the commissioners either.
Yes,
So what I'm trying to get to is about minutes. For me, originally, I understood that we weren't elaborating in the minutes our discussion because of the open meeting requirements of documentation. It all exists for the public to access.
Okay, so
In
the
the
open
transcript.
meetings law requires that we give notice to the public of our meetings, and that the meetings, and that usually it takes the form of publishing the agenda, and that the meetings are open in every real sense to the public, that they are held at a place and time that is not designed to prevent the public from participating, that they have notice and an opportunity to respond. It does not require public comment, although we have it. It is sufficient that if the public is here and can hear what we're saying, that's good enough. And minutes are The reason why one could argue that a more complete discussion or reflection of the discussion in the minutes is good is that while there is going to be a 2-hour audio and perhaps video record of our proceedings today, the ability, the time it takes the public meaningfully to access that and fast forward through and try to figure out who said what and what part of the meeting, it's more technically available to the public than it is meaningfully available to the public, in my opinion. And that's why sometimes a brief summary that has just topic headings, we talked about minutes, we talked about attendance, we talked about quorum, is a little more of a help to the public in trying to figure out what we're doing.
Agreed, and then also I just heard the chair say that if we do not have a quorum, then we do not have to have minutes.
That's probably right.
And in this case, I would say that it's a good thing to have a document of
Exactly
what we've
went on,
discussed.
Well, one of the things that I noticed that I noticed that I didn't notice the first time I read the bylaws, and we'll get to that in a minute, is that we need to give ourselves 3 more wishes. So what we need to do is to include in the bylaws a provision that says that even if we don't have a quorum, that we can take one action, and that is to adjourn the meeting to another date. Which is typical in
Right.
these kinds of bylaws, because
Right.
otherwise, sitting around this table and we all agree we're gonna meet next Tuesday or a month from whatever, is not technically a binding action. And it is a typical action to take, and that would then be recorded in minutes, even
right.
though there is no other minute to record.
Yeah, I think that was a helpful discussion.
So if we don't have a quorum, the action we can take is to adjourn the meeting.
Yep.
Okay?
And that still has to be done by majority.
It would be a majority of
Yeah,
those
the
present.
people that are
Okay.
present.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so the next section is about committees. It gives us the ability to create committees and delegate powers and duties to the committees. And each committee needs to have at least 3 members. We also had a discussion about the addition of working groups separate from committees. So Mark, can you explain that a little bit, since you had
I was the fool
a,
that brought it up.
had that section?
There may be times in which our work would profit from a short-lived examination of a topic that would not be an ongoing examination or an ongoing need to perform functions, and that the chair would be empowered to impanel a group of us or a group of us and or non-commissioners who would perform what usually it would be like research and report back on a topic, or examine how something is working in practice after we have adopted a proposal or a way of proceeding. But it would be, as I said, the point would be that it's a one and done kind of operation, and that it has some formal recognition, so that when we showed up and said, please tell me how this is going, someone would be motivated to answer our question.
Okay.
I think we should, sorry, but as you know, bylaws are something that you have to act in accordance with.
Mm-hmm.
I think in terms of governance, it would be good to have a chair of each of these committees. You have 3 members, but there's not a chair. So we don't want always 3 members talking.
Mm-hmm.
There should be a chair who has a committee of at least 2 other members.
That's
The chair would then report to the commission.
Well, this has the chair serving as a member of the committee, so we want to add, you're saying. we
A
wanna
chair
add
of the
chair of the
committee.
committee.
Yeah, because you don't want to chair every committee, unless you want to. You shouldn't speak for you.
I think the committees and the working groups are really good ideas to help us advance the work here. I wonder if there was any thought about what the process is for, getting the recommendations of the committees and the working groups to the full committee for vote or not.
Mm.
And whether the staff resources of the CEC are available to the committees and to the working groups.
I think that the answer to the second question is yes, totally. So we're asking, the first question is about, can we add something on process and bringing things to vote or awareness, or I'm not sure how else, of the full commission. So that you don't have like people just meeting on committee and then there's no
Well, I could
reporting
envision
back
a scenario in which a committee comes up with a recommendation, as a limited portion of this larger commission, that may not, serve the interests of everyone on the commission or, be in accordance with all the way all commissioners are thinking. So I think there needs to be some sort of process to adjudicate, if there's, not a unanimous vote on a resolution that comes out of committee.
Okay. Is that something you could?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, last article, well, no, two more. The next section is about what we need to put on our website, which includes live streaming or videos, and that we need to get these up within 72 hours after the meeting. We need to make sure that they're closed captioned and, available in different languages. Also accessible to blind or low vision individuals, that the website is accessible. And that minutes are translated. So we need to work on that.
Want to give yourself any sort of out for the 72 hours if there are extenuating circumstances? That's a pretty quick turnaround. If we have a blackout or, God forbid, something else.
I would, but
Yeah, I would too.
Okay, I can ask about that.
yeah, what I would do is make that as soon as reasonably practicable, so that it captures the need for speed that we shouldn't be dawdling. On the other hand, as you say, if there's some failure of technology, a concept with which I'm very familiar, then
We have some.
we're not out of
room.
compliance. That's
Right.
Okay.
Well, if that's the case, then that speaks, if we're gonna put more than 72 hours, that speaks to the minutes being more detailed. Because if you don't have what's on the website, if it's something written,
Interesting.
maybe
There could be a gap there.
right, be accessible.
Yeah,
Although the minutes are not public until we've approved them.
true. Well, no, we've actually put them
We
up
put
on the
them up on the
website, subject to
website.
approval.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that every minutes then reports that the prior minutes were approved, but we get the minutes up. Yeah. Okay, the last section is about the adoption amendment repeal and temporary suspension of the bylaws. So, yeah, and then we had said that we wanna make sure we're noting on the bylaws the date they were adopted every time they're changed to indicate the date that it's been amended.
That was good. There's a formatting error there's only A and B under this section, and C actually continues from the end of, so B reads, notice of the proposed amendment or
Thank
repeal,
you.
comma, and then it should continue to these bylaws
Bylaws.
defining
Okay.
a
There's no
proposal.
C.
Yeah, there is
Okay,
no C, yeah.
thank you. Okay, 10 members may by resolution suspend the operation of these bylaws. Is that something we need to think about?
That was in their draft.
Okay,
If you're going to suspend the bylaws, it should be a supermajority, I agree with
Yeah,
that.
Okay.
absolutely.
okay.
In what case would you
What-
suspend the
right.
bylaws? I've never heard of it.
Notice is probably the one that comes to mind, that if there's an exigent circumstance. Sorry, the one that comes to mind is notice, that you need to suspend the bylaws in order to overcome a problem with notice.
Okay.
That's the only one I can think of.
Okay.
Either that or a coup d'etat.
No, cool. Nobody wants to have a job. Nobody wants your job.
Nobody wants my job.
Take the fun out of government.
All right, so again, as I said to you all and everyone on the phone as well, please do take the time to read these again and send questions, comments, et cetera, so we can have, a revised version at the next meeting, and hopefully we will have a quorum to take a vote on the bylaws the next meeting.
So,
Want to
I
say
just have, because I'm a disciplinarian, actually.
keep us on track?
Yes,
like
no,
that.
I think that the bylaws or something should speak to attendance of meetings
Mm.
by commissioners.
Meaning the
You know,
expectation of
The
attendance?
expectation of attendance and, just doing something, showing up, calling, whatever. So, because, if there's no penalty, no game, no foul, nobody,
That's often in,
Yes.
bylaws,
yes.
boards and commissions.
Sorry to be-
That's what.
Are you saying like a minimum of meetings or something? Is that?
Something that would prompt people.
Or like being a
There's
member,
often,
being a commissioner in good standing?
Yeah.
There's often
I don't know.
an attendance rule written in that if you miss X number of meetings, then you can be removed.
Yeah, something like
Is that like across the board for community boards, is it?
Yes, I think it's like something for the
I know community boards have it, we
yes.
have it on, our nonprofit boards that I'm on.
What's the community board?
I believe it's
3 meetings
3,
without written.
I think it varies by
It varies by the
bylaws.
bylaws of the board, it's
Because-
written in the bylaws.
Because some of them have 3 full board meetings or 6 committee
Committee
meetings,
meetings,
or
yeah.
I
Some
think ours
combination
at
of the
Community Board
two.
7 in Manhattan, I believe it says a total of X number of meetings that you miss, whether they're full board or committee. In theory, they are self-effectuating, but they never are. So, in other words, when you miss the 6th meeting, you're out, except it
But
takes.
you're
an-
not,
But you're not.
but it's just something to you to
Mhm.
think about as an adult, as a responsible person.
Well, we'd also have to
You know.
write in there then there needs to be notice given to that body that appointed that commissioner. Right, because if, let's say, a mayor's appointee is in violation, steps off of the commission or might be taken off the commission, then there's
we have to
some
wait
notice
process to
that
get-
needs to be given
to
to
get
the
another
mayor that a
person.
replacement will.
Replacement is needed.
Yeah.
Okay. So the 2 places that could go are
For membership.
membership on page 1, or under section 9, article 7, section 9 on page 4, where you talk about participation by phone or video conferencing, and the alternative ways to participate, although there's a notation there that such participation is not deemed presence.
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
I
there's
kinda like the idea of putting it up front.
under removal.
wherever we're being specific about roles.
Yeah, the officers,
No, I think up here.
under
Membership.
membership.
Under membership,
Oh.
let's put there the expectation of attendance, and I'll draft some language for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So we have a couple of minutes left, or a little bit of, yeah, we're gonna start the public comment section around 5:30, so I think we have a little bit more time. Okay, is everyone ready to turn to the next item on the agenda, which is just, I'm gonna just give some programmatic updates for us and want to get your input on one thing in particular. So advisory committees, both of these were required by mandate to convene. For participatory budgeting, we've received 41 applications. We've read through all of these applications and we are in the process of determining the membership of this committee. We are missing representation from Queens and Staten Island in terms of people who applied, so I'd like to try to get some people from those boroughs to apply, so we can hopefully have an advisory committee that is representative of the boroughs. Since we are tasked with doing PB citywide, I think it's important. And then language access, we've received 17, but we are missing 4 languages that we asked people to, you know, if they spoke various languages. The languages we're missing are Arabic, Korean, Polish, and Italian. We do wanna have a language or a full site language access committee that is, it's actually technically called a language assistance advisory committee per the charter. We wanna try to have people who speak these different languages, so again, we decided for that one to keep the application open on a rolling basis, so again, we're trying to get people to apply from these language groups. What my question to you was is, how do you all as commissioners want to interface with these advisory committees? There's nothing prohibiting you from applying to be on the advisory committee? Or is there some, I mean, and this goes to the, sort of the question you were raising, Eve, a little while ago, just about if there are committees. It's analogous to that, right? Like, what's the mechanism that we want to have just to coordinate between the advisory committees and the commissioners? Any thoughts on that?
Maybe I'm not being imaginative enough, but I think that like the community board structure for a committee, subcommittee report out to the full board is pretty tried and true. You know, if they're making recommendations, to have a report of those recommendations with some context for, you know, the thinking that went behind them being reported to this board.
Yeah, and I would agree and add that even if there isn't a new recommendation, that a brief summary of the actions of the advisory committees would be appropriate on a heads-up basis, or it doesn't have to be incredibly detailed, but enough so that we know what is going on day to day, so that if there is that does spark an issue among the commissioners, that they have the knowledge to bring forward.
I also think that we need to know their calendar, when their meetings, if we want to attend their meetings while they're deliberating, that we can do so.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In the last meeting, we had talked a little bit about the participatory budgeting. Specifically, there were a couple of people who expressed interest in talking more about CEC and participatory budgeting. Is the best way to handle that just sort of like, would that be like a PB working group of a commission? Or do we talk to whoever's interested one-on-one? I mean, what's a good way to do that? Similarly for language access. Do we, I mean, because we did do a working group on, like, the listening sessions, right?
I think it's hard to envision right now how this is going to operate in terms of, I know that you said the commissioners can apply to be on these, what are we calling them? I just lost it.
Advisory
Advisory
committee.
Advisory committees. But then we're saying we can have access to go and participate, should we be so moved.
To sit in on the meeting.
To sit in on the meetings. So right now, I'm trying to understand how
How we would do that.
that would work, right?
Well, one thing we have agreed on is that whatever is being recommended, that's something that needs to come to the commission.
Right.
So we can definitely do that. I think that it would be valuable to have commissioners' input who are interested. I mean, it's sort of like a two-way process because your input can influence the advisory committee's recommendations as well. So if there are, you know, if there is a way to have you participate in the meetings, or if you bring us, you know, you can also give us, or we discuss here, whatever the recommendations are, we can bring that back to the advisory committee. So think about that a little more, I think.
See, what I'm thinking is, like Amy was saying, if we can go
To the meeting.
to their meetings, we can solicit, we can give our input there, and then when they come to brief us as the commissioners, that commissioner's input would already be with their data, rather when they come to us, and then we have input and we send it to them, and it's a
Okay.
back and forth thing. So if you have a burning desire about something, you just,
All
with
right.
your permission, of course, tell them
Just
that
let them know.
we're gonna be coming and we'll have something to say.
Is there any legal reason why that would not
Yeah,
be
I don't wanna
appropriate?
make this more complicated.
I can't think of one.
Okay.
I think that's well within the discretion of how to organize committees and their work. And what's more is, I'm not certain, our meetings are governed by the open meetings law, so we have to have at least some opportunity for the public to hear what we're saying and but some committee meetings, probably not.
They're not.
Right.
As long as they're not making final policy decisions.
Right. Which is gonna be made in public,
Comes
because we're
here
gonna
to
go
Right.
to it.
Exactly.
And will the commission, guide the work of the committees, or is that the chair only who's guiding the work of the committees? Do we vote on, let's say that we want X to be explored by the participatory budgeting committee, and we would like a report out of that by X date. Is that something that the commission would set forth and vote on and approve and give them that direction? Or would that direction solely come from the chair?
I think we could
Okay.
give the
We can do
information.
both. I mean, I think it's
Right.
whatever the commission wants to recommend, since the CEC is staffed, would have to go through the staff to the advisory committee, because the staff is also tasked with managing the advisory committee and executing on whatever is recommended, so, yeah.
Can I make a suggestion that what you're suggesting would be a, kind of like a joint responsibility? Because I think this commission will have good, interesting points of view on this work, but I also think because we have all these people coming in with expertise, that they might be thinking of stuff that we haven't thought of yet, that we not just be exclusively setting the agenda for the committees, but they actually be setting part of their own agenda.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think we definitely wanna create mutual influence opportunities, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't mean exclusive, I was just trying to get
Was it
to
salary
guidance
or
from
committee?
only the chair or from the commission as well. But of course, the committees would direct.
In my head, for the record, there is no only the chair. Because I rely on all of you to give me good ideas and feedback and guide the work of the commission, so. We do have a presentation today, so I'm gonna go through the next step, the bit of stuff, try to do it through quickly. For additional updates on participatory budgeting, we did attend 2 of the agency briefings where agencies answer questions from the public on projects, so started to make some of those contacts with different agency reps. We were in Manhattan and the Bronx. We are also working on getting a meeting on the calendar to get specific allocation from OMB. So hopefully we'll have an update on that in the next meeting. The next programmatic update is related to the poll site interpreter program. Election day is next week. There will be posted on nyc.gov/immigrants vote the entire list of poll sites where we are providing interpretation. They're wrapping up sort of like last minute details on these poll sites, so they haven't published them yet, but they will be up there. I did include in your packets the Know Your Rights flyer, which the CEC logo is included on. For your awareness, these are also gonna be translated, and one thing that was very important, I think it's gonna be important for all of us to keep emphasizing going forward is that even though we are tasked with providing an interpreter program, we want people to know that they have the right to bring their own interpreter. Because there is no way that any program administered by the city or the state is going to cover every language and every person's needs. So people need to be empowered to bring whoever they can to their poll sites, and that's not something that I feel like has been promoted. You know, it just needs to be part of the education that we engage in. I also I think it would be great to get, I've heard requests in the past, from people saying, could you do like a video or something that shows people how to vote? And that's something else that, I think would be great to do. Just like walks people through the process of walking in through the door, looking up your name, going to what exactly do you need to do? Because while something like this is great, I don't think that it takes into account things like literacy. It's gonna be translated, but literacy is at play for both, even if it's translated, they might not be literate to read it in their language.
In their language.
The mayor's office for people with disabilities working on something like that for ASL.
Yeah, that's great, like a video.
A video, yeah.
Okay,
On how to vote.
that's really great.
So, that's.
Oh, maybe we could use, okay, it'd be good to know, to connect with them. I'll follow up with them on what they're doing.
And the Board of Elections.
This is the mayor's office for people with disabilities.
They do
I
have,
think they have a video on how.
okay,
How to vote.
so thank you for that info, cause I'll follow up. Okay, yeah.
They also have, this is going back to what was in, some of what was in the bylaws, but it made me think, the mayor's office for people with disabilities also have people that train other people on how to make websites and content that people would put up on it, accessible to people with, a wide range of disabilities. And the hardest one to make accessible is people who use screen readers, and they have that specific expertise. I know because they came to the council to give our body and its staff training for that. So, and it was very useful for staff like myself, but even the council member offices. So MOBD is a good resource in terms of how we can make sure that the content that goes up on the website is fully accessible.
They recently held, I don't know if Lydia's in the room, but, Lydia is in the room. They held, MLPD did a training with Microsoft, on making documents more accessible, and Lydia did attend for the commission, so we are starting to get up to speed with that.
Microsoft. I was just recently at one of the events at the Microsoft store.
Yeah, I think that's where she was too.
But this one was on video games.
Oh, is that video? Okay. Okay, great.
I was there with a couple of members of the chapter and maybe important from the staff.
Yeah, that's really great. Okay, and then in the final section on community boards, we have started to, Lydia did meet with some of the commissioners, get their input on CBs, and also has been meeting with the CAU borough directors who interact a lot with the community boards. We're now trying to connect with borough president office staff, who coordinate with the community boards, and we'll be reaching out to individuals, district leaders. We also met with Do It, to understand what they're doing to support community board websites. They're in the process of piloting a new website format, and they want more and more CDs to adopt that over the next year, so I think they'll be launching that soon. So, that's it for the programmatic updates. Are there any questions?
One of the things that we discussed at the last meeting was, in effect, what allocation of funds and what is the source of the allocation of funds for the citywide participatory budgeting process.
Yes.
And it was one of those things that we weren't able to have a definitive answer at the last meeting. I'm hoping that
As to what the dollar amount is?
What's the dollar amount and where is it coming from? Is there a special allocation? Is it part of the negotiation with the council? Is it part of the mayor's discretionary funding bill non? I just was hoping for clarity about where that sits, because that will then enable to have a conversation about how that relates to other participatory budgeting that takes place through the council and council members, those that choose to do it.
Yes. Well, we hope to give you more exact information next time, but does anyone have any thoughts on that? On the PB allocation? Welcome.
Thank you. I think that the formula that the council uses on discretionary funding allocations of members should be a consideration in how we're giving out this funding. And I think that the amount would, so for instance, lower income communities and communities that have historically and disproportionately seen under financial investment tend to get more discretionary dollars for their district based on a number of different factors. I think that that's something that we should be thinking about here. And at the same time, I think for a citywide PB program, under the mayor's office, if we don't go big, we might as well go home on this. And I think that if we're talking about what a number should be, we should probably look at a potentially saying if our city budget's $90 billion, I think allocating at the very least 10% of that across the board. I know that's a shocker for many people, but like when you put power back in people's hands, let's actually do it in a way that's actually going to be real. So I think that is something that we should be discussing, what kind of formula to use in disbursement of the funds as well is really important, just because I think in our last commission hearing, we had this very amazing conversation about civic happy communities and how those would be more eager and engaged in the process already. And folks in those, some of those communities aren't the ones that have seen this underinvestment across the city historically.
Thank you. And other thoughts on that?
10% is an enormous amount of money. And my
Of 90 billion.
Well, right, so it might be that it's 10% of the discretionary funding as opposed to 10% of the overall budget. I don't know, it is my perception that an awful lot of the city budget is fixed between contracts that have been signed years ago and programs that we all probably think we need. And in the zero-sum game of a city budget, there might be some mischief there, so I would be concerned about 10% of what? And then one of the things we also talked about a little bit about last time, and I think this aligns with what you were saying about the well-served and underserved communities, I'm paraphrasing badly, that.
Well-funded and underfunded.
There you go, thank you. That to the extent that, for example, council members already participate in PB in their districts, that some accounting for that should take place or be included in how the citywide PB operates, so that it's not double dipping for some communities at the expense of others.
Yeah, and I think that we haven't come to a conclusion about if we're going to be doing just capital or program. And I think that's separate, because the council's only doing capital.
That's right.
And I think we have to be a little bit more specific when we're making comments, right? So like, for instance, discretionary funding under the council side is each member gets a certain amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
On the mayor's side, I don't think that that's the proper term used. So like, obviously there's gonna be operating costs, cost of city workers. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm being a little bit exaggerating and saying like, the budget it's actually 90 billion, but in the amount to give, I think we have to actually have a significant amount in there so that we can go back and say, we are one of the biggest cities in the world, and we are empowering our communities to be feeling the democratic values that we espouse and say that we are, and giving them the right to say, you know, I want, $100,000 to go to gun prevention, and I want $250,000 to go to a community center in our district to have a place for young people to go to. I want to invest in environmental programs, since our city is a city of islands and we're all going to be underwater, and being able to have those conversations, and that's programmatic. I think like, if we wanted to actually be a little bit niftier in talking about like urban planning, I'm not going to jump on Professor Barron's wagon here, but like, I think that there's a lot that we can say that we can do with this money. And I think when it comes to the reinvestment into our communities, we tend to have a lot of the same, that's too much. And I don't think that there is too much to give, considering the amount that communities have faced a significant amount of burden across the history of the city. So let's rectify that with a program like this, so that we can actually move us away from having this continued tale of two cities, if you may.
Thank you for that. So what I want to say about this right now, this is going to be an ongoing conversation. Two things I'd like to say here. One is, three things. I think it's important for people, as we were talking, who are interested in this, to really possibly attend the advisory committee meetings, right? About getting the allocation, we are definitely looking at what other cities are doing and trying to make a case for us to be comparable or better. And then the other thing about participatory budgeting that's very important to me, and I think also to others in the administration, including Deputy Mayor Thompson, is that PB is a process that has operated in a specific way. And I think it's very important that it is an avenue to greater awareness about how to influence budget, which I think can happen in different ways. The unique thing about PB is that it lets you actually vote on the allocation, and we want to have that happen more and more. But hand in hand with that, there has also been, people have been having input on allocations that the city has been making. So for instance, community boards have need statements. Those go to agencies. Agencies then weigh in on how OMB is making allocations to certain things. And I don't think people understand that even exists. Like, a lot of people don't know. that community boards are doing that, right? So we want to try to connect people to all of these different opportunities and hopefully longer term create a plan that is like synergizes these different ways to influence budget. So I think we need to be thinking about that as well and talking more about how that all works together. So then I'm just gonna stop here with the programmatic stuff so we can give, last time we had talked a little bit about DOE, what they're doing, Civics for All, so Jenna Ryle from the Department of Education is here with us today to give us a presentation about Civics for All and also participatory budgeting as it is happening in the schools. So you're welcome to take the floor.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I did bring our flyer, and I have a feeling that there will be a lot of questions. So if you want to pass that around, I'll kind of walk through the flyer with everyone. Is this the best place for me to be? I'll walk through that. Sarah can attest to the fact that I can go on about this initiative without taking a breath for about an hour, and I will not do that right now. So I'll give you the 10-minute version, and then we'll take questions, and I'll help you get to an understanding of what it is that we are doing. So I'll wait a second until everyone has a copy of the flyer. I'm Jenna Ryle, by the way. I'm the implementation lead of Civics for All over at the DOE. All right. So if you take a look at the flyer, I'm sure you've heard the phrase Civics for All. It is an initiative that is part of Democracy NYC. It was part of the mayor's 10-point plan and was announced in spring of 2018. And so initially that came to the Social Studies office over at the Department of Education. And so we started to take a look at what it would mean to strengthen the teaching of civics in the Department of Education. So I think something that's important for people who maybe aren't a part of the DOE or who aren't teachers necessarily to understand is the way that civics has already existed, so that we can kind of talk about why I say strengthen and not start. And so we follow, as do every school in the city, we follow the state mandates. And so the New York State framework has civics included in it in all grades K to 12. And so the New York State Social Studies framework has social studies practices. And those practices are designed to be embedded in all social studies teaching that happens across the grades. And so civic participation is one of those practices. And so that changes as we move through the grades to be age appropriate and grade appropriate. So there's that component. And then there's also the framework that dictates what content students learn at different age groups. And so our students, K1 and 2, I say all the time as a middle school teacher, God bless them, they teach people how to be people. And so much of the K1 and 2 curriculum is what we know to be civics for kindergarten, first and second grade. Then fourth grade gets into New York City history, that spends some time on the Constitution and the foundations of American government. Fifth grade has a case study where they look at America. Seventh grade spends a lot of time on the foundations of American government. Eighth grade builds on that a little bit, and then in 11th grade, they get US history and government, and in 12th grade, they get participation in government. So those are the mandated content where civics has already lived. So when we were brought Civics for All, we had to kind of take a second and look through what it was that we already had and what it was that we wanted to make sure our students were getting, and what we really wanted civics to be as it pertained to New York City. And so in New York City, we have an existing social studies curriculum that was written by New York City teachers, the New York City Department of Education. The social studies department is the only department that creates their own curriculum. And so the Passport to Social Studies curriculum, at the time that Civics for All was brought to us, already existed for grades K through 9, and 10 was in the process of rolling out. Right now, we're rolling out 11, and 12 is working. So we started by just kind of looking at what do we have, and recognized pretty quickly that the civics that we were already teaching our students was very foundational. This is the Constitution, this is the government, this is how our country got started. And so what we decided to do was take Civics for All and move that foundational understanding into a contemporary space and move the two of them together. So the example I use all the time is that our second graders have a lesson in social studies on the election process. That's important. They should understand how elections work. What we wanted to do with Civics for All was have our second graders understand that you are already a member of a community. That community impacts you, you impact that community. What should that engagement look like at the age that you are now? And so that's what Civics for All does from kindergarten up through 12th grade, builds on that. So if you take a look at the flyer, the Civics for All curriculum is the biggest piece. I like to say we erred on the side of excess in the sense that we have tried to give teachers every resource that they could want to teach a variety of civics concepts. The idea was that this curriculum would be in alignment with Passport to Social Studies, so that teachers who were already laying those foundations could build on them by using the Civics for All curriculum, but we wanted it to be flexible. So when Civics for All was brought to us and we were told, create a curriculum for civics, we quickly recognized as former teachers ourselves that you can create something new, but you can't give teachers more time in the day. And so anything that we create, we try to think about how is this usable, how is this practical for teachers. And so Civics for All is really a collection of standalone lessons, resources, and projects that teachers can integrate into a variety of content areas. So while it's designed to be aligned with social studies, it can also be used in the literacy classroom, in the math classroom, in the science classroom. We have schools who are using it in advisory. We have some schools who've dedicated, like, Wednesday is Civics Day. And so whatever content you're doing a Civics for All lesson that aligns to that content. So there's a variety of lessons there. There's a lot in that curriculum. It's about 4,000 pages from K to 12, so I'm happy to answer questions, but I can't get into too many specifics right now. PB, you all sound very familiar with participatory budgeting, obviously, on the city level. So we have participatory budgeting in your school. We had initially consulted with the participatory budgeting project on what PB looked like in the councils and how we could bring that into the school level. And so what that is we give our participatory budgeting schools $2,000, which doesn't sound like a lot. It's not for a school. I'll be realistic about that. But with that $2,000, we also have the teachers come and we train them, and they get 2 guides. They get the PVP guide to participatory budgeting, and they get our DOE written participatory budgeting in your school that has lesson plans and activities in it. The idea is to take the process that happens at the council level and make it work in the classroom. And so teachers get trained on how to do that. They go through a role-playing process where they engage in a mock participatory budgeting, and then they bring that back to the school. And the students are the ones who propose what they would like to spend the funding on, goes through a steering committee, follows the same process that the PB that you're familiar with follows, and at the end, the school community votes on how they want to spend that $2,000. So as much as that $2,000 is not a huge percentage of the school's budget, what we also tell our schools about and encourage them to do is that those that are located in councils where there's participatory budgeting, this is also an opportunity to educate the students about the fact that this is something that exists, get them excited about it, and also train our high schoolers so that when they do graduate, they want to engage in that process at the community level and they're familiar with what that process looks like. Civics Week, we used to call it Student Voter Registration Day. And so Student Voter Registration Day was very effective. It was a great program. We realized that to work within the DOE, in order to get as many students registered as possible, that it would be best to expand that from a day to a week. We also recognized, and we find it to be very important for our students, that we not necessarily make voting the gold standard of civic engagement. It's important. We all know that. I mean, just taking age-wise, our students from K to 12, a very small percentage of them are eligible to vote in the first place. And then if you take into account our students' immigration status, we have more students who are ineligible to vote. And so we don't want to send the message to our students that the only way to participate and the best way to participate is to vote. And so Student Voter Registration Day became Civics Week. And Civics Week is inclusive of the Student Voter Registration Drive. It's still a huge component of that week, but we also offer other opportunities to engage civically and educate our students about civic engagement during that week, just as a kind of like pep rally for civics. We don't have our official date yet. We're still working on that. It will be early spring of 2020. Last year, we registered 18,000 students. This year, we expect with pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds for that number to increase. So we're really looking forward to that. We're excited. We'll expand Civics Week this year also to kindergarten through 12th grade. So our elementary students will also be engaged in civic engagement activities during that week. Soapbox NYC. So right now, Soapbox NYC is living within our partner schools. So I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit and explain what our partner schools are so that these other things kind of make sense there. So when we developed the curriculum and started thinking through, it wasn't going to be sufficient to just have a curriculum, obviously. Anytime that we create a curriculum, we also develop a professional learning plan. So how do we support teachers in using this curriculum and rolling out this curriculum? And what you find anytime you release something new is that there are schools that are fully ready to like jump on board and dive into that work. Usually schools who've been doing that work already. And then there are others who want to dip their toe in, and it's going to take a little more time. And so what we decided to do was kind of two strands of rolling out the curriculum. One was the Civics for All Partner School program. So we opened it up to all schools in the DOE last year to apply to be a partner school. What that meant was that you were willing as a school to kind of take on Civics for All in a little bit more of an intense way. That you wanted civics to be part of your entire school's culture, and that you were ready to dive into that this summer. And so what those schools did is this past summer, they had a week-long introduction to Civics for All and a training. They received one-on-one support from my team. So I have the Civics for All team. There are senior program planning specialists and curriculum specialists on that team. The program planning specialists have about 17 schools each of our 104 partner schools, and they support them directly in how they want to roll out this initiative at the school level. And so those schools received the curriculum over the summer. They received that training, and then alongside that training, we have a number of partners that we're working with who were excited about civics in New York, who've been doing some of this work externally, who've been doing some of that work here in our schools. So we figured if you're already doing it in our schools here, let's work together and strengthen that. And so our partners have partnered up with our partner schools. And so our partner schools have the opportunity to choose different external options, and then we support them in getting those. So an example you may be familiar with is Generation Citizen. So part of our curriculum is the take action process. We have our own process for civic action projects. Generation Citizen and Make the Challenge support schools that are interested in really focusing on those take action projects. And then we have a number of other partners, the Justice Resource Center, the Constitutional Rights Foundation, who are helping us support schools in a variety of things that they're doing. We also partnered with cultural institutions. So our curriculum has 3 types of lessons in it. The social studies lessons that are relevant to civics, the civics lessons that we wrote specifically for this curriculum, and then lessons that were written by some of New York City's cultural institutions using the resources available to them for our students. So New York Historical Society, the Museum of the City of New York, and the Children's Museum of Manhattan have written lessons as well. But outside of that, we have about 20 cultural institutions across the 5 boroughs that have designed Civics for All specific field trips that are available to all schools in the city. So if a school calls a cultural institution and plans a field trip and tells them we're using the Civics for All curriculum, they can go to a field trip that specifies information from the curriculum. On top of that, we have our year-round teacher professional learning opportunities. So once the curriculum was given to our partner schools, they got that week-long opportunity, but that's not to say that the other 1,700 schools don't have access to that professional learning as well. The curriculum was sent out to all DOE schools in the fall of 2019. So in September, every single school in the city got a certain number based on the grade bands that they had in their school. So the curriculum is divided into K to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, and 9 to 12. So once they got those, they also got ordering instructions that if they wanted additional copies, here was how to get them, and then instructions to how to find our professional learning. And so we are offering about 40 so far sessions this year on different aspects of the curriculum. We called one unpacking, which is just kind of like the basics, but then things that are specific to civic action projects, having difficult conversations in the classroom, participatory budgeting, and so on and so forth. Soapbox NYC is one of those. So Project Soapbox came out of our partnership with MCVA Challenge, which is a civic education organization based out of Chicago. And they have, for a long time, had a public speaking competition in Chicago that has recently gone national, that asks young people to, they go through a 5-lesson process. They come up with an issue that they feel really strongly about, and then they're invited to get up on their metaphorical, or in some classrooms, an actual physical soapbox, that they stand up and they give a 2-minute speech. And in that speech, they say, this is what the issue is, this is why it matters to me, this is why it should matter to you, here's what we should do about it. So all of our schools are invited to participate in that. They are given the curriculum. It's available to any NYC DOE teacher. For this year, the actual competition will be amongst our partner schools. So we're gonna try that this year and then plan to expand it moving forward. News literacy, we've recognized that media literacy is a huge part of civics. It's a huge part of understanding the world around us, of social studies, of just being a person who exists in the world. And so we've partnered with News Literacy Project. They have a platform called Checkology that is available to all of our schools. It is a digital module-based platform where students go through a process of learning how to be media literate. So that's it. I tried to do it as quickly as possible.
We have 2 minutes for questions.
Questions? Yes.
Hello, thank you.
Hi.
This is all amazing. Is there any way we can get the curriculum?
I can find out.
Okay, and then the second piece is, as someone who helped run Student Voter Registration Day since inception,
Yeah.
I'm really excited that the city took over. That was always the goal. It was not for community-based organizations to do it, but the city to implement it within the Department of Education. So it's very heartwarming to see it in here. How do you share numbers of how many students interface with Civics Week? Like,
With Civics Week or
Yeah.
with Civics for All in general? So
Civics Week.
Civics Week right now is a collaboration between City Hall and the DOE. So the City Hall side is very much the keeper of the numbers. And so last year, our metrics were really the number of students who registered, the number of students who were in a classroom that was doing that. But in terms of activities that students were engaged in, last year was the first year of Civics for All. So we didn't measure classrooms that were doing civic activities that weren't student voter registration. This year, we're working with an external evaluator, so we'll have a little more information.
Great. And the other opportunities for young people to engage in Civics Week is community boards, PB, and
So we do still partner with CBOs for Civics
Okay.
Week. So as much as it's now a little bit more living within the DOE, and we provide resource guides to teachers. We have one called Vote, an instructional guide, which is part of the curriculum as well, on how to vote, right? Just how these kids are just registering, and we recognize that that's an important decision. So how do you choose a political party? How do you decide who to vote for? Where do you find information that's accessible and that's important and that's necessary based on the information that you need? So those guides go out to the students, and that's kind of our role. And then both PEU and CBOs support going into the schools as well. So the teachers are really the ones registering, but the outside organizations support that as well.
And does CFB still have a role within the program?
Yes.
Yeah, just quick,
Okay.
just quick.
I think so. You mentioned that you didn't want voting to be the be-all and end-all of the process. I'm just wondering, like, in terms of assessment of the success of the Civics for All curriculum, what does success look like?
So we've had a lot of conversations about this, in part because when you tell an evaluator that your version of success is a student's feeling of empowerment, they're like, I can't measure that, right? But they can. And so that's really for Civics for All, like our gold standard is the student change in, do you feel empowered? Do you feel informed? Do you feel, regardless of your age, that you know more now and that you can have an impact in your community and you feel like your voice matters?
I think that's very relevant in this body.
Quickly, yeah.
Is there anything beyond the students that goes home to the parents? Is there a handbook for parents?
That's a great question. So initially, it was, let's get this out, let's get a curriculum, let's work on this. Some of my goals for this year are to start to think about how we bring Civics for All and bridge that community and bridge the parent involvement, because to call something Civics for All and then only keep it in one part of the community isn't really true to what its name is. And so kind of this was phase one. I imagine that phase two will be bringing it to both the community and to parents.
Great.
Can we talk with you more later about the evaluation piece? Thank you so much
Thanks.
for being here. Okay, so now we're turning to public comment. We had 4 people signed up, 1 person can't make it, and that's Kathy Price. But first we have Karen Atlas from Arts and Democracy with us. Karen? Yes, she wanted to be here again.
Where should I just sit at the table?
I think you can go up there. I think the mic is on.
Pass these around. So honestly, I didn't know what to
So-
expect.
Sorry, I'm just gonna, just for the interest of time, I'm gonna be timing everyone who
Okay.
speaks, and it's 3 minutes.
Sure.
Thank you.
So, I'm Karen Atlas. I'm with the Director of Arts and Democracy and Naturally Occurring Cultural Districts, New York. I'm a big fan of this commission, and I'm excited to see what happens next. I wanted to, I just want to make kind of three main points. One is that I really want to encourage you to really see the nonprofits and community-based organizations that are doing civic engagement work and have been doing it over a long period of time as your partners. We're ready to work with you. Secondly, as somebody who works in arts and culture, I just want to encourage you to recognize the real power of arts and culture as part of civic engagement. And as you can see, what I've written are some examples, but there's youth media programs that build leadership and shift narratives. There's legislative theater and graphic design that demystifies policy and invites new people to the table who usually aren't there. There's community cultural hubs that play such an important role for intergenerational civic engagement in their communities. There's events like our community iftar that bring neighbors together who may not have met each other. And there's arts as part of participatory budgeting. And we're really happy to introduce you to some of this work and to help bring it to you, make suggestions for good partners. I also want to discuss PB, and I know that that conversation's just starting, so I feel like maybe I'm jumping ahead. I want to appreciate the discussion of allocation, which is critical, and to say that this is a process that takes up a lot of people's time, energy, and their heart, and raises a lot of expectations, and so please respect them to the degree of really fighting for an allocation that takes it seriously. I also want to say that, in addition to the money that's being allocated, there's the process that needs to be funded. If we really want to, and I've been involved in PB since it started. I've been a facilitator, I'm on my district committee, I'm on the citywide committee. And what we've learned is that community engagement and outreach has to happen throughout the process if you truly want it to be equitable. And there needs to be support for that process. And there also needs to be support for language access in that process. Of course, I'm going to argue for support for arts and culture as part of the process, because it is a way to it really is a way to make people participate in a way that isn't just coming to meetings. I really want to support the idea that that building neighborhood leadership is a key part of participatory budgeting, and also needs to really be focused on. In the city council process, this is done through district committees. What's very disappointing to me is there are very few district committees around the city, so the actual leadership development piece of the process is lacking, and I hope that that will be first and foremost a part of the process as it's designed. I will definitely argue for expense funding. We actually do expense funding in District 39, and even though it's a very small pot compared to the capital pot, it's where everybody gets engaged and excited, and again, it's a real good way to address equity issues and bring new people to the process. Two other things, transparency and accountability about funded projects. That's an issue that is a big issue, and I want to put on your agenda. And finally, the coordination between the city council process and the Civic Engagement Commission, the advisory committees, and now that I've heard about Civics for All, coordination there are so many opportunities for supporting each other and complementing each other's work, and I really hope it doesn't end up being parallel processes. Thank you.
Any questions for Karen? Okay, next on the list was Alejo Rodriguez, Assistant Program Developer, Community Liaison from Exodus Transitional Community.
Thank you for the introduction, and like what I really didn't know what to expect. It's my first time here. Didn't bring anything to pass out, be more than willing to share some of my comment in writing later on through email.
That would be great.
Okay, as you said, my name is Alejo Rodriguez. I'm from the Exodus Transitional Community, which is a reentry organization in East Harlem. Right? We serve individuals also in Harlem, as well as in Poughkeepsie and in Newburgh. but our bulk of our work is right there in East Harlem, and I'm here to talk about the significance of looking at civic engagement as a way of empowering those who have been incarcerated, right? As well as stemming from the comments you mentioned earlier about those who've been marginalized in disenfranchised communities. When we start talking about individuals who have been incarcerated, we're not just talking about the punishment of crime, we're talking about what mass incarceration has been in this community. And New York City has been a leader of mass incarceration. When we look at mass incarceration, we're not just talking about crime and punishment, we're talking about using prisons as a way of social control of already heavily marginalized communities. So it's very layered, and at the iceberg right now is right in our face is those who have been incarcerated, but it's connected so much in the racism that's been in this country that this has been very intentional. So as long as this state has been a state in this union, right, it's very intentional to marginalize people of color. It's been very intentional to marginalize immigrants coming into the country, more specifically those who are speaking Spanish, right? So this is very much layered, and we see it now still playing out. There are city blocks in New York City been recognized as being $1 million blocks by the number of people being incarcerated in that block alone. The cost to keep them in prison is worth $1 million, but it also undermines the value of social capital of civic engagement. It undermines, and communities have not been able to come up from out of the situation that they're in politically. And the thing about, we say discrimination, we all know what that looks like, but there's another way of having that discussion, and that is you cannot have discrimination, or there needs to be someone privileged while someone is being discriminated against. So you cannot have mass incarceration without white privilege. You cannot have mass incarceration without the privilege of the power structure that be. So there isn't just a matter of, we're going to talk about civic engagement at the heart of it, and we want to reach all those who have been marginalized. It isn't about asking for certain funds to be allocated. It's like something that's due. There's something that needs to be owed to this community. We're talking about true civic engagement. So part of it requires a level of education that needs to be an investment into this. I mean, really, I really appreciate what you contributed earlier. We have to put our money where our mouth is in terms of the educational process of this. I know my time is up. Is that my time sign right there?
It is.
I'm sorry if I taken too long, but it's just that I'm very passionate about this.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that this is something that we can consider, and I want to have an ongoing conversation and how we can make this happen so that we reach the people, and also use people who are formerly incarcerated as leaders in their own community to address political apathy that has been existent in the communities for quite some time. And I just need to make one last comment, and that is, we're not going to be able to remedy this with one registration, with one vote, with one just get Trump out of office or anybody else that nobody dislikes. This is going to have to take this is going to be a long process to truly address political apathy in marginalized communities. Thank you for your time, and I apologize for taking too much time.
Yeah, in your email, you had mentioned something about the importance of educating people on parole regarding their voting rights.
Yes.
So is that something that you are currently engaging in, that you'd like to partner with the city on, or what, just?
Thank you. So we have constructed, we call it Peace Plan, Participatory Education and Advocacy and Civic Engagement. It's an initiative that Exodus Transitional Community. Last year, Governor Cuomo had authorized an executive order which would allow people on parole the right to vote. My personal experience, I'm on parole right now myself, and no one educated me about how to register. Everyone was advocating for me to register, but I was really ignorant about the registration process. And I knew myself that if I was experiencing that, I could imagine how many others were intimidated by the process. So this is where the initiative for the Peace Plan started. And now, but we're not just looking at now those on parole, because individuals on parole, their relationships with the community there's an intersection that really reaches out and branches out in so many different other areas. Like Karen, what you talked about earlier, the other relationships that happen indirectly. So we want to utilize these individuals. We're going to educate the people who are on parole. We're challenging them to be leaders, to go out into the community to begin to have discussions, to really have genuine relationships about their political actions. So that way it isn't just, at Union Square, oh, hi, how you doing? Have you registered to vote? And you sign here. No, it's real communication, other people holding other people accountable about their civic action. So that's our vision, and to create leaders from those people who have been specifically discriminated against, and have it just build out. And of course, that we were talking about earlier, all things need funding. As Karen pointed out, now excuse me for calling you Karen, but that's what stuck to my head. We need money. We need funding for this, and it's not going to be like it can't be just be a little piecemeal money. We need money that's going to be actionable.
I have a question. How do you see our commission and you working for the justice involved community so that we can get to some of the things that you're proposing, and also do the work that needs to be done for that justice involved community and get them involved as well? Do you see?
Yes. Besides the allocation of funds, right? Building community, but one of the things I knew was very significant while I was incarcerated, right, was building significant community relationships. The idea of leaving from inside prison, and even though you're free, there's this isolation. You really don't know how to begin to have conversations with people. Your socialization, there's a socialization process that people need to learn how to do. I think we can do that through civic engagement and working with people while they're inside. And so in the preparation, in the process, before we even get to parole, I think we could begin to transition the idea of how we're working with people on the inside. For an example, education has shown to be one of the best evidences of people who have college education while in prison have shown to have the lowest recidivism rate. Right? The thing about it is only like 5% of the people in prison are actually in college. What are we doing with the other 95%? All we're hearing about, let's just have more college programs. I think civic engagement offers a different kind of education process that we can duplicate the model of what the college programs are doing in support of because it builds community in the college program. It's not just the academics of the college program. You see, there's a building, there's a socialization that happens in the classroom that you can't measure, but it's long lasting and people feel they're part of something. So creating a whole new space of engagement, both in the inside, in prison, and on the outside, that can be a way the commission can direct New York City to say, hey, we want our citizens who are coming from upstate back into the city, back in the community. We want to start building relationships with them now.
And also in New York City, as you know, the city council had just voted to approve closing Rikers.
Yeah.
In 2026, we're going to borough-based jail system. I think a lot of good that came out of that discussion was to hear from communities that have been so heavily impacted. And I think that this commission should reach out to MOCJ and to DOC and talk about how we can build something into the plan for 2026 and how civic engagement can be part of the path to closing Rikers.
Thank you for that. And just as a personal experience, I was a part of a lot of the advocacy that was done. And I walked with individuals, and yet coming home, no one even educated me about what advocacy was really about. I knew Rikers Island was wrong, but I didn't really know my position in the movement. And so there's this lapse, there's this void that's happening, not only in terms of voter registration, but we have individuals, and I know the nonprofits who are doing this work, they're very well intended, but they're not addressing the individual's need. How do you identify the personal issues that a person is dealing with in advocating for themselves and civically, right? And they leave it to nonprofit organizations, and nonprofit organizations who are dealing with the reentry services are only providing programs. So there's a void that's not even being addressed on the individual need. So the person is being led, if you would, in the advocacy movement. At the same time, they might be dealing with healthcare issues. They might be doing the insurance issues, housing issues, where they're going to eat, jobs. But yet they're over here screaming, close Rikers Island. I mean, it's a good gesture. I'm supportive of that. But what about the other things that could lead them back to prison? So I believe there needs to be an educational process in us, and through true civic engagement, there's an actual working relationship building, not just the voter registration and voter turnout.
We can talk afterwards, but are you talking with your council member, and have
Yes.
you been talking to Mark J?
Not so much Mark J, but Diana Ayala, more specific,
You
and
should be
Kevin.
plugged in, because this is a lot of the discussion that's going
Mhm.
on right now.
Mhm.
So you should be plugged in somehow,
Mhm.
so we can talk afterwards.
Sure.
Maybe we can get you on a.
Is Christina
working
C
group.
here? Sorry, is Christina C here from Extinction Rebellion? Okay, she's not here, so if anyone has any further questions or discussion on this topic or
Also,
for the
on
other-
channel 13, there is going to be a program about, college education in the prisons.
Mm-hmm.
Bard College is one of those, Bard University
Yes,
is
I
one
know,
of those that does
yeah.
that. I forget what day it is, but I
Yeah.
just saw it on, PBS, so I would encourage everyone to take a look at that.
Yeah. There's a lot there's a lot to draw from college programs. I was in college when I was in prison. I actually acquired a master's degree. So I benefited from my education while I was there. But I also realized that there were so many other individuals walking the yard who had no connection, still struggling with their GED, but they're going to be returning it home too as well. You know, what tools are they being offered? And they're not being reached because of the lack of, or because college is not available to them. Right? And there's something, like I said earlier, there's something that happens through that interaction with somebody coming from the outside, having a discussion and talking about learning or talking about education. It introduces a re-socialization process that people have been removed from, and they build new relationships. I think this is critical to a person's process in preparing for their release, and I think it can't be duplicated, and I think we can do that through civic engagement. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, if there are there any announcements or any additional issues that we need to address at this time?
Do we now have a quorum?
No. Oh, we do. You're
Dun,
right.
dun, dun.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We do have a quorum, so we
Point of
can.
order, I suggest the presence of the quorum.
There is a quorum, so we can go back to the minutes. And get approval on the minutes. So,
So I would move to adopt the minutes as presented.
Second.
okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So the minutes are approved. Okay?
Right.
Great, thank you, Murad.
Yeah.
You made us a quorum.
Try to be useful sometimes.
All the time.
Yeah, we were talking before about, just a note on that, like, the importance of having a quorum to take any action, and that even though people are calling in today, that wouldn't allow us to approve the minutes because we didn't have a quorum here.
Good thing I didn't get a response.
Yeah, I guess so.
Going forward, when you circulated that very helpful message about how to call in and so forth,
Yeah.
it might be a good note to add to that message next time that
Good idea.
that this is not actually being present at the meeting.
Very good idea, yeah, thank you. Okay, so, if there are no additions or announcements, can I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you. So the motion to adjourn has been seconded, and all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. All right, motion is passed.
Thank you.
We're calling the meeting to adjourn. Thank you for being here.